So I'm going to introduce my boy, Caleb Maupin. He's going to be our final speaker. He's the leader of our organization CPI, and I'm going to tell you why he's important to me. These are 7 things that Caleb taught me, okay? If you haven't watched Caleb, he's got a YouTube channel. He teaches mainly history, and he broke apart some ideological ideas in my head that I couldn't find the answer to anywhere else. Nowhere else. And that's why I'm here today. One of the things we're always told is that the only way to get rich is capitalism. It's the only way to make any money. Socialism just leaves everyone starving in a rice field. That's how it works. Caleb actually wrote a book. It's back there, called Getting Rich Without Capitalism. I find it very interesting that Americans seem to know in the back of their mind that the Chinese economy is about to surpass the American economy. And then they do mental backflips to explain that that's because of capitalism. Capitalism led by the Communist Party of China. I don't wrap your mind around that. I don't know. You also heard growing up, communism never worked anywhere. Caleb taught me that is the greatest conspiracy in American history. That is brain poison. It's a great way for you to never link up with your fellow workers. Never realize that there's 99 of us and there's one of them, because that would be communism. And communism never worked anywhere. Well, those bullet trains in China are pretty interesting. I think they're mining helium-3 on the dark side of the moon. That's weird. How'd they do that, since they're so poor? Maybe a slingshot or something. A balloon. There you go, a balloon. Well, I also find it really interesting that we're all here today pretty much to not go to war with Russia and China. And, just sit down and brainstorm for a second. What's something in the past 100 years that Russia and China have in common with each other? That? Karl Marx. Communism. We believe those same ideas, the same that has risen China from a complete backwater, same with Russia, to putting satellites into outer space, to mining helium on the dark side of the moon, could also be used to set the working class free here as well. Yeah. Okay? Caleb taught me that. CIA hasn't hacked my phone yet, so I appreciate that. Thank you. So this is interesting. Caleb taught me. You always hear about communism, they're a dictatorship. Okay? Well, imagine if our government was honest. Imagine if they were like, hey, we don't give about you at all. We're going to take your tax dollars, and we're going to funnel them through the Ukraine FTX grift, okay? We're going to send it back to certain Democrats, and we're going to give it to military defense contractors, of which we all own stock right over there. And it's going to go in our pockets, and we don't care. And I would say, like Donald Trump said, we're in Syria for the oil. I'd go, well, at least they're honest. But that's not what they tell us, is it? They tell us they're for us. Well, if you read the Chinese Constitution, I believe it's on the first page. It says, we are a dictatorship of the proletariat. What's that mean? That's scary language. It means our government is for the people, for the vast majority of the people, and we are willing to put the ultra-wealthy in their place, prison if need be, to keep the poor from sleeping next to the White House. You are right now living in a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. You are living in a dictatorship of the richest people in this country, and they don't really care about you. We want to flip that around, okay? It appears until we hit communism and you can buy a Tesla for a penny, scarcity is going to force us to have a government. And it's kind of going to be like that dictatorship word, which I think is just a way to never do anything, okay? So if we're going to have a dictatorship, let's have one of the working people, the 99%, okay? And if the 1% want to fight it, they can organize and fight it. Well, they just bought off the media and everything else. School system. This is a big one Caleb taught me. A movement open to my Christian faith. I didn't really want to be a communist or a Marxist because I thought I had to rebuke Jesus and God and very important things to me. What is spirituality to me? However you define it, it's what gets you out of bed in the morning and makes you think you can make the world a better place. If you don't have that, like Camus said, kill yourself, right? I'm not going to do that. So spirituality is whatever gets you out of bed in the morning. CPI will give you something to believe in and build. Marxism to me is a tool, okay? And I can feel the Holy Spirit in this room tonight. If you don't like that language, I can feel dialectical materialism in this room tonight. Okay? Whatever works for you. To me, Marxism is a tool, and Jesus Christ is what makes me willing to die for the people. It's that is simple. Caleb taught me that, and he taught me I can own that and be that. All right? No one can tie it together like Caleb. Caleb Maupin, I've searched the depths of the internet. No one can explain it as clearly as Caleb Maupin.
Have you seen Vosh?
Well, Vosh is pretty good. Vosh does have a better man bun than Caleb. So Bernie sold me out. I gave Bernie a lot of money. And imagine in 2016 if when Julian Assange put his freedom on the line to expose that Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party were stabbing Bernie in the back. Imagine if Bernie said, to hell with this, we're marching on Washington. Every single one of my supporters, we're going to Washington until we get a free and fair election. And we're not leaving. Well, he didn't do that for some reason, did he?
Twice he didn't do that.
Twice he didn't do that. And the second time I go, there's only one way. It's to build a party of the working class. This guy's going to help us do it, and I hope you'll be a part of it. Finally, you guys all coming together with me, I'm not even joking. This is one of the best nights of my life, all right? Caleb put it together. All right, there's the births of my children. There's the day I realized this girl's the love of my life. And there's the day in Kansas when I went to my first CPI event. Me and my family couldn't afford a hotel room. There wasn't much room in the Airbnb. We bought a tent, and we slept in the backyard, didn't we, Caleb? We enjoyed it. My little girls enjoyed it. They swam. They had a good time. Caleb was friendly to my family. Took us in, treated us like family, fed us like a Baptist church. All right? And now look at me, man. Okay? Most people, you'll join an organization and they'll just waste your time. All right? Caleb understands there's two things we got to do. It's not that complicated. Educate people, organize people. What's that second part mean? We find out what gifts they have. Maybe they're good at speaking. Maybe they can capture an audience. And we put them to work. And if you join CPI, Caleb Maupin will do that for you too. So come up here and say a few words, my brother.
I want to start out by thanking you all for being here and thanking you all for making this so special, because people don't seem to realize sometimes how much work goes into making an event like this happen. You know, I've been on the other end many times and I've walked in, but I want to thank Elizabeth for the hard work that she's engaged in. No one's worked harder than Elizabeth. I want to thank Brian for the great work he's done, with the music committee and our other performers as well for the great, performances that they've done. I want to thank the other folks who coordinated and helped us set up and do everything. This took a lot tonight, but it happened, and it was a challenge, and it's really great that we're here. It's really, really great that we're here. Now, if you watch my live streams, you'll be familiar with this little mathematical formula. 100 years or so before Ayn Rand said A equals A, Friedrich Engels, in a book called Dialectics of Nature, explained dialectical and historical materialism with this phrase: A does not equal A. And what does this mean? Well, this means that this first A can never be exactly the same as this second A, because the world is constantly in a state of motion. The world is constantly moving. The past is never the same as the present is never the same as the future. We are constantly in a state of motion. The world is changing. The philosopher Heraclitus, he said, you never step into the same river twice. And it's this understanding that the world is constantly changing and in motion, and that things have the ability to reinvent themselves rapidly. That's what gives us the ability to be optimistic, because there's so much darkness and so much evil all around us. But when we realize that things can change and that our lives can have an impact on changing the world, that gives us the ability to see through the nightmare of the present. John Steinbeck, the author of The Grapes of Wrath, it's a very radical book if you actually read it. I don't know why they let us read it in school, because if you actually understood The Grapes of Wrath, he wrote, if you could separate causes from results, if you could know that Thomas Paine and Karl Marx and Thomas Jefferson and Vladimir Lenin were results, not causes, you might survive. But that you cannot know, for the quality of owning freezes you into I and forever cuts you off from the we. That's from The Grapes of Wrath. And he's explaining how it is the material conditions of the world that actually drives the changes that happen. Individuals emerge and they give voice to sentiments that exist already among the population. But they did not invent those sentiments. It is the conditions of the world that give birth to great heroes. People like Che Guevara, people like Hugo Chavez, people like Mao Zedong and Fidel Castro, they emerge as a result of material conditions, and they give voice to the sentiments that already exist. Now, there's a couple people here from Missouri tonight. Tyler's from Missouri, and Simon's also from Missouri. Is there anyone else here from Missouri tonight? Oh, very good, very good. All of you from Missouri have a special place in my heart, because my grandfather was from Missouri, and I used to go out and visit my grandfather in Missouri. And I'm sure, as our Missouri residents can attest, it is one attribute of older men in Missouri is they're not always politically correct in the way that they speak. I think that's a fair way of putting it, right? They're not always, totally PC in everything they say. I remember one time I was over at my grandfather's house, and the screen door popped out. Right? And he said, God damn it, this house must be built on top of an Indian graveyard. And I was a kid. I did not know what that meant. It's kind of scary if you think about it. I'm like, there's ghosts in the house. What is this? What is this? So my parents had to explain to me that this is an old superstition. It's like the movie Poltergeist, right? It's like the movie Poltergeist, this belief, and it was just an expression. My grandfather was using an expression. But I think about that moment where my parents are trying to explain to me what my grandfather meant when he said that. I think about that moment. I really think about it, and it strikes me how much America is cursed. Because it's not just one house in Missouri that's built over top of an Indian graveyard. It's a whole country that's built on top of an Indian graveyard. And a Vietnamese graveyard. And a Korean graveyard. And the graveyard of the African people in the transatlantic slave trade. And that in many ways, even in the good times in America, that you could feel this curse hanging over U.S. society. You go back to the 1950s when there was a booming economy, there was still something evil beneath the surface. All those cars and all those houses and all those hula hoops and refrigerators, we know they were dripping in blood. And there was some kind of evil that hung over U.S. society. And I think a lot of the younger folks that get caught up in the wokeness, what they're trying to do is they're almost trying to engage in some kind of magical ritual. They're convinced if they say the right magic words, if they say systemic racism, if they say check your privilege, that somehow that curse will vanish. Somehow that curse will go away. They're engaging in a kind of magical thinking, like where if we just do the right politically correct kind of thing, everything in U.S. society will be corrected. But that's an illusion. It's an illusion because we live in a material world. And these kinds of contradictions have to work themselves out. They don't change because you say the magical words. They change because society changes. And that's why a lot of younger folks fall into it, but that doesn't apply to our leaders. Why is it that our leaders are doing this woke makeover of the United States? Why is it all of a sudden Kamala Harris, who locked up thousands of African-American men for victimless crimes, is suddenly kneeling for George Floyd? Why is it that CNN and MSNBC are now promoting wokeness? Well, the power structure in the United States is doing that because they are generals fighting the last war. Because it is a fact that during the Cold War, when Jim Crow segregation was still going on, the Soviet Union took a petition to the United Nations to expose what was being done to African Americans. That's why. Mao Zedong welcomed black freedom fighters to China. The Black Panthers were welcomed to North Korea. And they've studied the history of the Cold War, and they've realized that the oppression of black people and the discrimination that other folks have faced was a bludgeon that the global anti-imperialist movement could use to expose the United States. They could say, the United States, you're going around the world talking about freedom and democracy. What do you do to black folks? What do you do to Chicano folks? What do you do to Asian Americans? They could use that to expose the United States. And so now, having studied the history of the last Cold War, in the new Cold War, what they're trying to do is they are trying to completely reinvent the image of the United States. Say, we are not the America of the Ku Klux Klan anymore. No, no, no. This is a completely new America. And with this new moral authority they want to give themselves, they feel that that will give them the justification to then attack Russia, or to attack China, or to attack Venezuela, or to attack Iran, because, oh, look, we are now the bastion of civil liberties and human rights. It is an attempt to wash and whitewash the image and the history of the United States in order to justify regime change around the world. And it's been a bit confusing for those of us who call ourselves leftists, because they have hijacked certain phrases and certain terms that we have used over the years, but they're using them for a very different purpose. And they're using them not to build working class unity, but to incite division. And they are using them to set sections of the population against each other so they can make us all poorer and grind us all into deeper poverty. And it was Rosa Luxemburg. I like Rosa Luxemburg. Back at the time World War I was breaking out, this is what she wrote. This world war is a regression into barbarism. The triumph of imperialism leads to the annihilation of civilization. At first, this happens sporadically for the duration of a modern war, but when we enter a period of unlimited wars, it begins progressing toward its inevitable consequences. Today we face the choice, as Frederick Engels foresaw it a generation ago, either the triumph of imperialism and the collapse of all civilization, as in ancient Rome, depopulation, desolation, and degeneration, a great cemetery, or the final victory of socialism, and that means the conscious, active struggle of the international proletariat against imperialism. This is the dilemma of world history. And so what is she saying there? She's pointing to the fact that capitalism and Western imperialism and the system we live under, if it just falls, there's no guarantee that what comes next is better. The Roman Empire fell, but was the Roman Empire falling something that was ultimately good for humanity? No, because it was replaced with something worse. Resulted in the population of Europe going down very significantly. The average person living in Europe, their height decreased by inches. Life expectancy went down. A brutal, barbaric, evil empire was replaced by instability and chaos, and it led to depopulation. In fact, the population of Europe didn't return to the level it had been at the height of the Roman Empire for 1,100 years. And it was actually after, around the time this country was being founded, that Europe was returning to the population level. And if any of you, had the opportunity to do any tourism, look at the buildings here in this city. Look at those columns. Look at the names of streets. There's a reason that the founders of the United States were almost obsessed with the Roman Empire and the fall of Rome. The most popular book at the time the United States was being founded was called The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbon. And, Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton and George Washington, they were obsessively studying what went wrong in Rome. They were thinking, we're building a civilization again. How can we do it differently so we don't experience what happened in Rome? And so in order to understand why we're in the situation we're here now, we have to explain why the Roman Empire fell. We ought to just look at this. Why did the Roman Empire fall? You almost don't want to ask the question, right? When you hear a politician get up and say, well, the fall of Rome, you almost want to run away because of what they might say. But why did the Roman Empire fall? Well, it fell because of the fact that slavery is not only a brutal, barbaric, evil system, it's also highly inefficient. If you think about it, what incentive does a slave have to work? Not much. Basically, the slave master says, you work or I will beat you, or you work or I will deprive you of food. They have really no incentive to work. And in a small scale, if you have 5 slaves, the slave master can stay on top of all 5 of them and keep them going. But when you got 10 slaves, it gets a little bit harder. And then when you get 100 slaves, it gets even more hard. And then when you have 1,000 slaves, it becomes even more difficult. And you have to have a slave whose job it is to tell the other slaves what to do. And he's going to be wildly popular with everyone. He's just going to be the most popular guy. So then you have to have another slave who tells the slave who tells everybody what to do. And you can see why it was a historical fact that the bigger the Roman Empire got, and the bigger their slave plantations got, the bigger their mines got, the lower their industrial output became, because slavery is a highly inefficient system. It was a historically outmoded system. And around the world, there were countries that had adopted feudalism. Feudalism is a more advanced system. A serf is different than a slave. A serf, he grows his own crops and he gives his obligation to the landlord, but then he gets to keep the rest. So it's a little bit more efficient. And there were kingdoms throughout Europe that were starting to move toward feudalism. But Rome was not going to move toward feudalism. And Rome was basically holding back history. It was going around the world, going to countries that had a more advanced system and holding them hostage at the point of a spear and extracting slaves and tribute from them. And that was the basis of the Roman Empire. And it was a deeply, deeply unsustainable system. And the bigger Rome got, the more unstable it became. And towards the end, the Romans couldn't even organize their own army. It got to the point when they were fighting Germanic tribes, the Ostrogoths and the Vandals, they couldn't even get their own citizens to go and fight the war. So they had to hire other Germanic tribes to fight the Germanic tribes. And it got to the point that they couldn't hold their empire together. And this is kind of what Rosa Luxemburg is getting at, that imperialism leads to decay and collapse of a civilization. Now, I want to point you all toward a very, very important book, which is a book that was very, very meaningful for me in my political developments, by Michael Parenti, The Assassination of Julius Caesar, A People's History of Ancient Rome. This book is very, very important. And the reason that this book is important is because it tells the story of a Roman leader named Julius Caesar. Now, Julius Caesar was not a communist. He was not an advocate of the slaves, and he was very much a conqueror. But he had the understanding of what I just told you. He could see that the Roman Empire, the way it was set up, was not sustainable. And he, as a military man, from purely a military perspective, was sitting there and saying, okay, this isn't going to work. Having an empire centered around one city is not going to work. And so he came up with the idea. He said we ought to start developing places like Alexandria and Athens, and we ought to start building up cities throughout the empire that can be like trading hubs, right? And that we can give citizenship. He even wanted to give citizenship to the people in the various city-states so that they would have some say in it. And he also started building public libraries because he said we need the Roman population to be smarter, not dumber. And he was trying to think, how can we keep our empire from collapsing? How can we make it sustainable? Because he could see that the empire was coming apart. But the measures that Julius Caesar wanted to take in order to make the Roman Empire sustainable cut into the wealth of the wealthy Roman landowners, the senators. So we all know what happened. On the Ides of March 15th, 44 BC, he went to go give a speech at the Roman Senate, and they all lined up and took turns stabbing him in the back, and that was the end of the Roman Republic. From then on, Rome did not have an elected government. At that point, it had an emperor who claimed to be a god on earth. The Roman rulers said, we can't afford to have any of this democracy nonsense and elections. They had a hereditary Senate, and they had an elected National Assembly. They said, no more of that. Now we just have an empire. And it was that moment where Rome as a society came together and said, we are not going to adjust. We will not allow our own backward, regressive tendencies to be corrected. We will not move towards some kind of multipolarity in our empire. That was a decisive moment in setting the stage for the eventual downfall of the Roman Empire. It was economics and the failure to address deep-seated economic problems that led to the fall of the Roman Empire. And as many other speakers have articulated tonight, we have a similar situation here in the United States. The problem with capitalism is not that capitalism creates growth. That is not the problem with capitalism. The problem with capitalism is that the more wealth they produce, the poorer we get. That's the problem.
That's right.
Self-driving cars would be a great thing in a rational society. It would mean this chore called driving that's done by cab drivers, it's done by Uber drivers, it's done by truck drivers, traffic courts, all of that could be gotten rid of. And all this human labor that's expended unnecessarily in driving could be moved on. But under capitalism, self-driving cars would mean mass unemployment and riots in the streets. I many times have repeated, if you want to explain to someone the problem of capitalism, talk about the coal miner's riddle. The little boy says, "Father, why is it so cold?" And he says, "Because we can't afford any coal to heat the stove." And he says, "Father, why can't we afford any coal?" He says, "Because I lost my job at the coal mine." And he says, "Why did you lose your job at the coal mine?" He says, "Because there's too much coal." That's capitalism. That's the capitalist system, where the more you create, the greater poverty you have. And that when you have a big technological leap, it exacerbates this problem. And we're living in the period where the computer revolution has sped forward our ability to create with iPhones and iPads and 3D printers. They're doing things that they never could have imagined before. And in a rational society, that would be great. But we don't have a rational economic system. We have an irrational economic system. And under capitalism, your only value is your ability to sell yourself to a boss. And so because of that, this huge technological leap is leading us toward a bigger and bigger economic disaster. And so there's one faction in the ruling class, the ultra-rich, and they have a solution. And you know what their solution is? Degrowth. Grind us all into poverty. And they've been doing it around the world. Iraq used to be a prosperous, independent country selling oil in the international markets. And what did they do? They ground Iraq into poverty. They bombed it and destroyed it. Libya used to be the most prosperous country on the African continent. And now it is in ruin and destruction, and they export about 10% of the oil that they used to export. Afghanistan was kept in chaos for 20 years. The USA didn't stabilize Afghanistan. The USA kept Afghanistan unstable. They kept the drug lords operating. They helped the terrorist groups continue to do what they're doing. They were not trying to stabilize the country. And this degrowth, which is really what imperialism is. Imperialism is about holding back economic development. It's about keeping the world poor. They have decided that to save their system, it's not enough just to do it to Africa now. It's not enough just to do it to Asia and Latin America now. Now they're going to do it to Ohio and Pennsylvania and Texas and every corner of this country. And this middle class that they propped up to stabilize their society, they've decided they can't afford it anymore. That's what they've decided. They've decided they're going to terminate the middle class. And they're doing it to save their system. But not all the capitalists agree about this. There's many capitalists who say, no, I don't want my profits to go down. No, I don't want people to be too poor to buy my products. It's the ultra-rich, the bankers, the oil monopolists. They're the ones that have this degrowth agenda. They're the ones at the World Economic Forum. But there's a lot of lower-level capitalists who don't want to go along with it. They just want to make money. It's not that they're good. It's not that they're moral. It's just that they just want to make money. And that gives us a great opportunity. At the beginning of the Cold War, the Communist Party of the United States, William Z. Foster, they all came out with a statement about what they were for. And if you asked them what they were for, yeah, they were for socialism down the road. But they understood that the road to socialism in America was the construction of an anti-monopoly government. A government combining the forces that were against the big monopolies. A government that represented the working class and the labor unions, a government that represented the small farmers, a government that represented the small business owners, a government that even represented members of the capitalist class that were anti-war and against the big monopolies in their drive. And the Communist Party, they said, we want to build an anti-monopoly government and an anti-war government, a government that does not want to engage in war. And if you're a serious Marxist, you understand that that is your responsibility. Your responsibility isn't to just scream into the void and be angry. Your responsibility is to try and build an anti-monopoly government, an anti-monopoly coalition. And if you take your job seriously, that is what you should be doing. Now, I want a couple volunteers to come up and unfold something I've got here. Yeah, unfold that, yeah. All right, so now we know what this is. This is the Chinese flag. But it has a particular meaning, and this is what we need to remember. These 4 stars, they represent what was called the block of 4 great classes, the block of 4 classes. And it was the peasants, it was the workers, it was the middle peasants, those are like small farmers, people who owned their own land, and it was the national capitalists. And the Communist Party unified all of them. And that's what this big star here, that stands for the Communist Party. And the Trotskyites and the ultra-left elements, they looked at the Chinese Revolution when they were victorious in 1949, and they said, well, that's not real communism. That's not real Marxism. Marxism is a dictatorship of the proletariat, and you're talking about a block of 4 classes. That's not real. That doesn't count. But the Chinese communists, they had a response. And what was their response? And they said, well, China, the majority of our population are peasants, and the main contradiction is imperialism. So we have created a block of 4 classes, but it is real socialism because it is led by the Communist Party. And they said the Communist Party has a proletarian ideology. Proletarian ideology. You guys can sit down now. Where does the word proletarian come from? Well, we have to go back to ancient Rome, don't we? Does anyone know what the word proletarian literally means? It actually literally means one who has children. That is the definition of a proletarian. That's really what it means. The class, the ones who procreate. And the reason that was the term used for certain people in ancient Rome is in Rome you had slave owners and you had slaves, and the proletarians were neither slaves nor masters. And all they had were their children. They didn't own any land, they didn't own any property, but no one else owned them. They were the class that had nothing but their children. The only way they could have property is if they had children. Your children were considered to be part of your property. And the proletariat had never existed before until ancient Rome. You know, in other societies, you have slaves, you have masters, you have serfs, you have landowners. There'd never been a proletariat before. And that's why when great kings from all over the world, when Cleopatra and others visited Rome, they were shocked because they knew that Rome was the capital of the world. This was the capital of the modern world, the center of this global empire. But they would see homeless people on the streets. They would say, how can this be? How can this be? Well, that's because when you have proletarians, you have homeless people. Because if the proletarian can't sell their labor, they can't survive. And so this great city had a big problem of all these crowds of desperately poor and homeless people. And Julius Caesar, part of the way he built up his power is he became a champion of the proletariat. And he started passing laws to help the proletariat and things like that. And that's part of why he was killed. This is what you have to remember about Rome. See, back in Rome, we understand, they had the polytheism, where they believed in different gods. And the way Rome was set up was that every section of society, they had their own rites and religious practices. The navy of Rome, they worshiped the god Neptune, and they had a special temple for the god of the ocean, Neptune, and they had special rituals that only sailors would engage in because they were worshiping the god Neptune. There were parts of the military that worshiped Mars, who was the god of war, and they had certain ceremonies they would engage in, and these were called the mystery cults, right? It was based on your profession. You prayed to a certain god, you engaged in certain rituals. There were certain teachings that you learned as you became, if you were a sailor for a few more years, you'd learn more about the legend of Neptune and his life. And these were called the mystery religions, the mystery cults. This is how Rome was set up, as they had this. And as the proletariat in Rome started organizing and started withholding their labor and saying to the employers, the pipe fitters and the bricklayers, they started to develop their own mystery religion. A lot of them were from Greece. A lot of them were Jews from Palestine. And when they would get together and organize as the proletariat, they started to worship their own God. And they started to have their own mystery religion, if you will call it that. And they started to worship Jesus the carpenter. Woo! This is a historical fact. Go read The Foundations of Christianity by Karl Kautsky. Christianity as a religion began as the political expression of the Roman proletariat. That's what it began as. The proletarians were asserting their rights and fighting back against their employers. They developed their own mystery religion. They worshipped a craftsman just like they were. A lot of them were Jews from Palestine. And they began to organize and to fight for the rights of the proletariat. And, as we know, back in ancient Rome, the Romans were not particularly thrilled about this, and that Christians were being persecuted, etc. But after the Christians continued, and after so many of them had been fed to lions, and so many of them had been burned at the stake, and it still existed, there started to be some within the Roman ruling elite who started to say, well, maybe there's parts of this Christianity thing that we can co-opt for ourselves. We have this problem with homeless children. These Christians, they build orphanages. So maybe we could find some good Christians to build orphanages and deal with this homeless children problem, And all over the empire, we have all these people fighting against us. And when they rally against us, they always have their own God they rally around. But these Christians, they believe in only one God. So we could outlaw all the other gods and just have one God. And so you saw Christianity being co-opted and adjusted and taken from being a revolutionary movement and turned into a mechanism for stabilizing the empire. And the Christians, when the early Christians were talking, they were talking about how one day Jesus was going to return and he was going to tear down the empire. And they were going to create a society where the last shall be first and the first shall be last. And those who were loyal reigned for 1,000 years. However, as Christianity was getting watered down and adjusted, it started to become, well, you should obey the Roman Empire because, look ahead to the next life. Think about the next life, be obedient and submissive. And Christianity was being watered down and adjusted to serve the needs of the Roman Empire. And if you think about it, that's a lot like something that's happened to our movement. There are elements that have taken socialism, the movement of the proletariat, and turned it into a mechanism for trying to stable their empire. You think about Jesus Christ. How would Jesus Christ feel if he returned now to see a church with a Ukrainian flag supporting the neo-Nazis in it? But then, dare I go there?
Go there.
How would Lenin or Stalin or William Z. Foster or Gus Hall feel if they saw the disgraceful organization that calls itself the Communist Party USA? So much evil is being done in the name of our movement right now. What began as a movement to liberate the proletariat and destroy empires has been hijacked as a mechanism for trying to stabilize their empire. And people say, well, Caleb, don't be sectarian, don't be divisive, don't talk about this. We have a responsibility to talk about this. We have absolutely a responsibility to talk about this. If you want to read some angry writing, go and read the writings of Vladimir Lenin when World War I was breaking out. Because World War I would not have happened if it weren't for socialists who sold out and let it happen. Right. And if the socialist movement had stuck to its principles and said, we'll never send workers to kill other workers, World War I wouldn't have happened. But they sold out, they abandoned their principles, and 20 million workers were sent to their deaths. And if you read Lenin's writings, this is what he says. Neither we nor anyone else can calculate precisely what portion of the proletariat is following or will follow the social chauvists and opportunists. This will be revealed only by the struggle, and it will be definitely decided only by the socialist revolution. And it is therefore our duty, if we wish to remain socialists, to go down lower and deeper to the real masses.
Woo. Amen.
This is the whole meaning and the whole purport of the struggle against opportunism. By exposing the fact that the opportunists and social chauvinists are in reality betraying and selling out the interests of the masses, that they are defending the temporary privileges of a minority of workers, that they are vehicles for bourgeois ideas and influences, that they are really allies and agents of the bourgeoisie, we teach the masses to appreciate their true political interests and to fight for socialism and for the revolution, all through the long and painful vicissitudes of imperialist war and imperialist armistices. The only Marxist line in the world labor movement is to explain to the masses the inevitability and the necessity of breaking with opportunism, and to educate them for revolution by waging a relentless struggle against opportunism, to utilize the experience of war to expose the utter vileness of national labor politics. So when we have a situation like this, where the imperialists are stirring us up for war against Russia, and we see organization after organization and entity after entity that speaks in the name of socialism supporting that, it is our duty to go lower and deeper to the real masses to expose the opportunists. That is what our job is. And it's not our job to try and please them. And it's not our job to try and go to them and accommodate them and be part of them. It is our job to go lower and deeper to the real masses to expose the opportunists. That is our job. We should be knocking on doors in Pennsylvania and Ohio and Kentucky and Minneapolis and wherever to tell people about why to oppose the synthetic left. That's what our job should be. Out of the movement! Out of the movement! Out of the movement! Out of the movement! Out of the movement!
To the masses! Woo! Woo! Yeah!
I was on a show with libertarians. Pasta was here earlier. And, they were saying, well, Caleb, we see how corrupt the government of the United States is. Why would you want to expand the government? And I said, I want you to imagine we had a different kind of government. Instead of having a government that's weak and pathetic and rolled over and does whatever Jeff Bezos and Wall Street said, let's imagine for a moment that we had a government that kicked Jeff Bezos' ass.
Damn right!
Let's imagine a government that fought against the rich and powerful and was strong enough to rejuvenate this country and rebuild it, and was strong enough to say that Russia and China and Iran and Venezuela would be great friends in doing so. They want growth, we want growth, and let's kick the degrowthers out of Washington, D.C. Imagine we had a government like that. And let me also add that Che Guevara, he very famously said that true revolutionaries are motivated by great feelings of love. And that's a cliche, it gets thrown out by socialists a lot, but it's really important for us to understand it now, because you can't organize people if you hate them. You can't organize people if you look down on them. You can't organize people if you think you're better than them. And that a lot of what passes for socialism these days is academic elitism, and it's contempt for the masses of people. They don't love the masses of people. So of course they can't organize them. We have to learn to love people, and it's hard. And there's a lot of backward ideas out there. But an old communist once said to me, it's the only working class we got, Caleb, and this is our responsibility. This is our responsibility. We have to do the hard work, and the hard work is not staying safe in our movement safe spaces and accommodating them and compromising our principles in order to appease them. The hard work is going out of the movement to the masses.
That's right.
You know, AOC, good night. I wanted to like AOC. You know, I'm photographed with AOC. Before she was AOC even, when she had just announced her campaign, I went to a reception, and I wanted to like AOC. That's the wrong attitude to have, that we should want to just call out anybody, right? If there's this young woman, and she's running for Congress, and she believes in socialism, we should have wanted to like her, but you can't like her now because she's pro-imperialist. I mean, and she's made that abundantly clear. But we should try, right? We should have the attitude that anyone who comes along in the power structure could be an ally, and we should try to maintain alliances if possible. It's not possible with AOC. You know, I looked at that tweet she made at the Super Bowl. Did people see this? Yeah, so at the Super Bowl, there was a Christian group, and they made an ad. And the ad, it was, you know, it showed Jesus bringing people together, saying, love your enemies. It showed, like, children hugging each other and stuff like that. And it was, you know, it was promoting Jesus. She tweets out, I doubt Jesus would spend $1 million to make fascism look better. Wow. Well, that's reprehensible. No, I mean, you know, it'd be one thing if this was an ad opposing abortion, or if this was an ad opposing gay marriage. This was just an ad promoting Christian love and brotherhood, and she calls it fascist. That's bigotry, you know? And if there was an ad for Islam and she responded that way, people would call it out. If there was an ad for Judaism and she responded that way, people would call it out. We ought to call that out. And we ought to say to our Christian brothers in the working class, AOC is pushing bigotry against you, and that's not okay. And you know, Ilhan Omar, you know, another member of our great squad, she posted, it was something about January 6th. And she said, well, people aren't rallying behind Trump because of their economic suffering, she said. She said, it's not because of economic hardships or injustice. She said, they're just losing their privilege. And I look at that ad and I think, you know, I'm a socialist because I believe everyone has the right to a job, has the right to housing, has the right to education. And when people are losing their jobs and homes, and when communities are falling apart, it's not someone losing their privilege. It's a violation of their rights. And this is an opportunity for solidarity. Now, you all are great. I've been talking to you all, and we've had some great speeches here, and, you know, I really want to spend my time in this room, but for just a moment, I want to speak to the isolated, lonely, negative, millennial or Zoomer communist who's watching this at home on YouTube, and I'm going to speak directly to them in the camera. You're watching this, and you're feeling a lot of negativity. And you're watching this, and you're frustrated, and you're angry. And your politics are motivated by anger and frustration. They're frustrated by isolation. And that's understandable in a society like the one we live in, where death is all around you. Death is everywhere in this society. People are dying of opioids. People are killing themselves. We've got the danger of a new world war hanging over our horizon. Death is everywhere. But there's a huge effort from social media, from mainstream media, to try and get you to die. For just a moment, I want you to look inside of yourself and listen to the part of yourself that wants to live.
That's right!
If you're going to choose life, you're going to need brothers. You're going to need sisters. You're going to need comrades. You're going to need to learn to rely on people. You're going to need to learn to get along with people. You're going to need to learn to deal with people sometimes letting you down or doing things that disappoint you. But if you're going to live, you can't do it alone. You need a community. You need people to struggle with. And my whole adult life has been spent in communist organizations. And I can't imagine what life would be without this. But a lot of people say to me, Caleb, you got this great job as a reporter. Just, make a YouTube video every so often. No. When it comes to politics, for me, it is all about building an organization. It is all about building a community.
That's why we're here.
And we're here, and there's many people right now all over this country who are longing for something to believe in. And the ruling class is telling them that there is no truth. There is no God, there is no truth, there's nothing worth fighting for, there's nothing worth dying for. Just roll over and be degrown so we can save our system. And we are here to say we will resist. And we are going to build a solid block, and we are going to come together, and it's going to be difficult, and we're going to get on each other's nerves, and we're going to make mistakes, but it must be done. There is no alternative. We must build our organization. And I just want to point this out. It's almost like they've given us a gift. Because for years, the reason that Americans wouldn't become communists was they were told, well, communism is against the American dream. It's against the American way of life. Well, now the ruling class is saying the American dream is over. There is no American way of life. Just whip yourself and be full of shame about the evils of this country. Well, actually, that's an opportunity for us to step up and say, actually, there are things in the history of this country to be proud of. We can be proud of the labor movement. We can be proud of John Brown. We can be proud of Fred Hampton. And we can be proud to be part of the legacy of resistance to the evil empire that has existed here. It's an opportunity for us. They're giving us a gift. In addition to that, for years, Americans have been told, oh, you can't be a communist because communists are atheists, and they don't believe in Christianity. But now the ruling class is saying there is no God, and Christianity is fascism, and anyone who believes in any principle is an agent of fascism trying to brainwash you or control you. So that gives us an opportunity to say, well, we're going to stand up for the belief that there is something worth living for, that it is worth living for the sake of others, it is worth sacrificing for a higher purpose. This is a huge opportunity for us, a huge opportunity for us. And for a long time, they've told us, oh, you can't be a communist. You can't be a communist because in America, anyone can work hard. Anyone can go out and achieve their dreams and be rich. And communism is against that. But now, look at the United States. The whole place is falling apart, and their message to us is, oh, we should all be poorer. We should just accept it. We're a cancer on the planet, and we should all be poorer. Well, we can say if you want the American dream, if you want a better future for your children, if you want the roads paved in your neighborhood, you want jobs and schools and opportunities, you got to be a communist. They're giving us a huge gift. Everything Americans believe in, they are handing to us on a silver platter. We just have to take it. And they are really scared of anybody taking it. They're terrified of this. Since 2008, they've been warning about the dangers of populism. Populism is the most dangerous thing ever because they know it's only a matter of time before we band together and start fighting to defend our schools and jobs and communities and coming together and realizing we have a common interest, rejecting their low-wage police state and building a new America, and doing so in solidarity with Russia and China and Venezuela and all the countries they've told us to hate. They hate us and they hate those countries, so I think we can bond together against our common enemy, don't you? And so I'll just end by emphasizing what I said before, which is that we have to learn to love. And if we can't learn to love, we can't learn to love our community, love the people in our country, love the people in our communities, if we can't learn to be patient with them, we have no hope. The time for being bitter and isolated and pessimistic is over. We have a very serious task ahead of us. The stakes are getting higher. It's time to get out of the movement and get to the masses. It's time to build the Center for Political Innovation. It's time to take our job seriously. Dare to struggle, dare to win. Thank you.